This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bill. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hello, I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, the Brutalist Outsized Ambition edition. It's Wednesday, January 8th, 2024, and this week we have an all-movie show, something that warms my heart as a movie critic. We will be discussing, first of all, The Brutalist, the 3.5-hour-long epic starring Adrien Brody as an immigrant architect after World War II that seems poised right now to become an awards season darling, having just walked off with Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Director at the Golden Globes. Then we'll talk about Carry On, a Netflix action thriller that pits Taron Egerton as an everyman TSA agent against Jason Bateman, cast very much against type, as a ruthless terrorist looking to get a deadly item onto a plane. Finally, we'll talk about Movie Club, Slate's long-running yearly feature in which I, Slate's movie critic, and a group of my colleagues from other publications talk about the movies of the year and kind of get personal and exchange emails about the movies we loved and hated and why. We're joined today by Isaac Butler, a longtime friend of the show, a frequent contributor to Slate, the author of The Method, an indispensable acting history of the 20th century, which, Isaac, I recommended just last week to a young actor I met.
Nice.
You're also the author of the upcoming book, The Perfect Moment, and you had something else going on you wanted to tell us about this week. Can you talk about that?
Yes, totally. So I have a new series that I am doing with the Criterion Channel about the craft of acting. What is it called, you say? It is called The Craft of Acting. They're going to be sort of sporadically new episodes, probably quarterly. The first one is up now. It was taped live at St. Anne's in the fall, St. Anne's Warehouse. It's a conversation between me and Ethan Hawke about his career and about the craft of acting and about performers he admires and how he thinks about acting and approaches roles. It features an in-depth conversation of 3 different movies, and then those movies are also in the channel as part of the collection. So it's a really fun talk. I think you'll learn a lot. It's very inspiring about creativity and the creative life and stuff like that. And we just had a wonderful time talking. And there will be more new ones coming this year. So if you're a Criterion Channel subscriber, that just launched a few days ago on January 1st, and you can watch it right now. And if you're not a Criterion subscriber, I mean, come on, subscribe already.
Oh my God, Isaac Butler plus Criterion. That's irresistible.
Yeah.
Totally going to be watching. And I almost went to that event with Ethan Hawke and I had a conflict. So now I get to see it. Excellent.
Now you get to see it. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you for that. We are also, of course, joined from Los Angeles by I want to call you our fearless leader, even though I'm not quite sure how you are our leader, but you're definitely fearless. You are Julia Turner, a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism in Los Angeles. Hey, Julia. Happy New Year.
Hi, Dana. Happy New Year. Thanks for being here, Isaac.
Thank you so much.
All right, jumping right in. The Brutalist is the third movie to be directed by the director and former child actor Brady Corbet and co-written by his partner in life and screenwriting, Mona Fastvold. They also made the films The Childhood of a Leader and Vox Lux. But with The Brutalist, Corbet takes the scale of his filmmaking to the next level. This is a huge, sprawling film, complete with an overture and an intermission and a kind of throwback to the roadshow movie days of David Lean epics. It tells the story of Laszlo Toth, played by Adrien Brody. He's a Jewish-Hungarian architect fleeing the Holocaust who winds up in Philadelphia. Toth was a Bauhaus-trained architect back in Budapest, and through his new and much humbler job working as a furniture designer in the shop of his cousin, played by Alessandro Nivola, he comes in contact with a mercurial tycoon, played by Guy Pearce, who hires Toth to build a massively ambitious and possibly doomed project, a cultural and religious community center dedicated to the memory of his late mother. This project stretches on for years with holdups and disasters along the way. Later in the film, Toth will be joined by his wife Erzsébet, played by Felicity Jones, when she emigrates from Hungary herself. It would take up this whole segment just to summarize all the story threads in The Brutalist, but let's kick off by listening to a clip from the movie's trailer. That was the only audio made available to us, but I think it gives a decent sense of what the movie sounds like, including the, in my opinion, gorgeous score from the British composer Daniel Bloomberg.
These are yours, yes?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
Tell me, why is an accomplished foreign architect shoveling coal here in Philadelphia?
I'm afraid it is not so simple. There was a war on, and yet many of the sites of my projects had survived. My buildings were devised to endure such erosion of shoreline.
Isaac, I'm going to ask first of all just what your sensory impression of The Brutalist was. It is a really overwhelming visual and auditory experience. I'm assuming you saw it in a theater because that's pretty much the only way to see it right now. And we didn't mention this in the run-up, but it's shot in VistaVision, which is this nearly obsolete 1950s format that's, extra widescreen with a ton of visual information. I'm not sort of videophile enough to describe exactly what's special about VistaVision, but it is certainly a lot to visually take in at a time. So first of all that, and then we can sort of drill down into the finer elements of the movie.
Yeah, the movie begins on a really intense note of a, kind of sonic collage of this letter that Felicity Jones's character has written, Adrian Brody's character, and this like very big score. You mentioned the score. I think the score is beautiful. It might be the best part of the whole movie. And then, these very chaotic handheld shots of people leaving a boat. They've gotten to Ellis Island, so they're getting ready to leave and enter the United States. And that sort of sets the tone for the film, that it has this kind of intense multi-layered thing going on where there's always lots of stuff going on at once. There's sort of somewhat show-offy cinematic technique, and then this score, and then whatever's going on in the story, and then whatever's sort of detailed in the sets, and so on and so forth. And what's impressive about that, I mean, it's impressive on a lot of levels, but part of what Courbet is doing that's like really wild is hiding the film's minuscule budget for its ambitions. This is a $10 million movie that looks like a $200 million movie because it's shot mostly in handheld, in interiors, and with stuff sort of hidden out of frame so that they don't actually have to build a bunch of the things that they could sort of indicate it and have you use your imagination. And so what's going on is they're kind of overwhelming you all the time as a way of kind of getting this story and its emotions across, was kind of my feeling about that. But I will admit, I don't think the movie works. I think everyone should see it, and I also don't think it's good, which is a weird kind of place to be in. I think the filmmaking chops on display are amazing, but it kind of feels like a cake that you've folded too many ingredients into, and so all the air and the egg whites has gotten knocked out, and so when it comes time to bake it, it just ends up kind of flat and sort of smushed out in a bunch of different directions and leaking out of the cake pan. That was sort of ultimately how I felt about it, as much as I admired certain things about it.
Leaking out of the cake pan. All right. How about you, Julia? Did you find that the ingredients came together? I mean, I will completely concur that this movie has a bit too much going on, but to me, the sheer ambition and the sheer beauty of it took me a really long way. What about you?
I definitely liked it more than leaking out of the cake pan would suggest. And I think I'm still wrestling with whether I think the kind of ambiguity of how all the ingredients are put together is sophisticated and deeply meaningful, and I will come to a brilliant, comprehensive understanding of it some moment a few weeks hence, or whether there isn't quite a there. Like, I think that's a fair question to ask about it. On the other hand, I just was completely transported by the filmmaking in a way that you want a movie to transport you. Adrian Brody's performance is fantastic. I've always enjoyed him as an actor. I don't think I've ever seen The Pianist, the film he won the Oscar for when he was quite young. But just his face, like the degree to, I'm curious to hear you talk about it too, Isaac, but the degree to which what Hollywood does in anointing actors is just pick interesting faces that can do interesting things. I mean, he's like a Modigliani come to life. He has the most interesting face, and he is totally compelling and believable as this character who, I mean, you mentioned that opening scene. People are being pulled out of a boat. We don't know yet what they're being pulled out to. We're not sure where we are in the war. It feels like we're in World War II, but we have no idea whether he's going to get pulled out of the boat to be freed or be murdered. And I think that's quite intentional and part of the question the film is asking about what it's like to move to America and pursue an American dream, right? And the way in which he emerges from the Holocaust so particularly himself and so unbowed and with his own same taste and ambitions. There's a beautiful moment where he encounters his cousin, Attila, played by Alessandra Nivola, who's running kind of a modest furniture shop in Philadelphia and has offered him a berth to sleep in that's not much brighter than the hold of the ship. And he asks, he's sort of the magnanimous American, but he's also clearly kind of intimidated by this refugee, and asks what he thinks of the furniture. And he says, I think it's not very beautiful. And like he has this selfhood and taste and aesthetic aspiration coming out of these horrors that feels so real and earned in particular. And, you know, I think what I'm curious, Dana, is sort of what you make of this character, like why this character in the, you know, I still don't quite understand why the film is directing my attention toward this character, where it's taking me on that journey. But I loved watching it. I thought it was so beautiful. It did not feel long to me. Like, even though it's so long, it's really interesting. It keeps going from place to place. The performances are fascinating. The second act takes a turn when Erzsébet arrives. And so it keeps bringing you new chapters.
Yeah. I mean, I clearly am on a different page from both of you for this movie because, as we'll get to in our movie club segment, I put it on my 10 best list of the year. Like, it was certainly one of the most significant cinematic experiences I had this year, even though, as I say in my entry in the list about it, I consider it a grand folly. I consider it like a great ambitious film with great ambitious failures. And maybe we can get into some of those, although not too many without spoiling the ending too much, I think. But yeah, the Adrien Brody performance and character are both just huge. I absolutely love that, how complex that character is and how cagey the screenplay is at revealing details about him. You know, we actually don't learn that he was an architect or a designer until fairly well into the movie, right? So that moment you referred to, Julia, where he tells his cousin, "Oh, your furniture's ugly," we sort of think, well, why are we listening to his opinion, right? And then soon afterwards we realize, oh, well, he has these chops as a designer and builder, and, you know, his aesthetic is part of what his cousin wants him to bring to the store. And that ends up becoming sort of the model for the movie, because the Guy Pearce character, you know, on a much larger scale, sort of wants to take the taste and the sense of beauty of the Adrien Brody character and buy it, essentially, right? So it ends up becoming a movie about the relationship between patronage and art, you know, and about sort of importing this aesthetic from Europe into this more capitalist American setting. I mean, it's a movie about big ideas. It's about far more than just the relationship among these characters, right? It really is sort of about, maybe almost to a fault, about large, sweeping historical ideas, and I appreciated that side of its ambition as well. I also, unlike a lot of people, I feel like maybe unlike Isaac as well, I just found it dramatically compelling. I really wanted to know what happened to all of these characters, which is part of why the massive ellipses that occur in the second half were so frustrating to me. And then again, I have to tiptoe around those to not give things away, but there's a lot that we don't know and don't find out about the characters, sometimes to artistically ambiguous and effective ends, and sometimes just maddeningly frustratingly so, I thought. But Isaac, as you say, the cinematic chops alone take you a pretty long way in this movie. I spent a great deal of the movie not even knowing, going in for the first time, I've seen it twice now, about the budgetary miracle that this movie represents. Not even knowing that, I still went in thinking, how did they do it? How did it get made? And there's all these moments that I now know from having interviewed Brady Corbet and Mona Fastvold about it, are essentially sleight of hand. So like when you see the monumental structure that he's building, that Adrien Brody's character is building for Guy Pearce, there's all these silhouettes on a hill, right, where you see it sort of rising up in fast motion as if it's being built over a period of time. And those are all models. They're scale models that are filmed in silhouette, so as to disguise the fact that they're, whatever, one 1/100th of the size of what the actual structure would be. And it really carries off tricks like that extremely impressively. So just simply witnessing it as a cinematic object, I think people who care about cinematography, about scoring, about all the craft that goes into making a big movie will be fascinated by seeing this one. I mean, at times its ambitions, not always fulfilled, but at times its ambitions almost seem to be like it's trying to be a Bernardo Bertolucci or a Luchino Visconti movie. It's sort of a big art film of the kind that isn't really made anymore. And that is sort of fascinatingly retro, but also I think, and again, can't get into the content of why without spoiling things, I think that this movie's understanding of gender and sexuality and power relations is modern. It's 21st century and sophisticated in a way that I think a Bertolucci movie, made back in the 60s would not have been. So yeah, I mean, I give all props to this movie while having lots of reservations about many elements of it, and also sort of hoping that it doesn't sweep award season completely, if only because, and I think this will be the backlash against it in award season, if it does start to do well, it is a white dude's movie about a white dude, and it very much takes place in a kind of 20th century world, that it doesn't break a ton of new ground in terms of its self-presentation, even though I would say that I think the content is a bit more sophisticated and modern than it's gotten credit for. So I wouldn't love to see it sweep Best Picture and win everything in sight and not leave any space for other up-and-coming filmmakers. But that said, Courbet himself is an up-and-coming filmmaker. He's only 36, and he's really accomplished something with this, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you about the filmmaking chops. I just wish they had worked as hard on the screenplay as everything else. I mean, to give one example, there is never a moment in the film in which the values of the Bauhaus are articulated in a way that would make you understand why building a community center and making it look like Buchenwald was a good idea or beautiful. Like, those big ideas are rarely actually addressed in the film at all. They're often, except for the gender stuff. I think the gender stuff is, and the Jewish identity stuff is there, but everything else is just sort of gestured at. And as soon as it's going to develop any of those ideas or do anything about it, it gets distracted by something else and moves on in such a way that I just kept like waiting for it to say something or do something about modernity and America in this moment. And again, the importation of the European aesthetic into them, the way we sort of grabbed everything we could from Europe when Hitler rose to power, and it in turn powered us in the 20th century. And while it does an okay job of dramatizing some of that, I just don't think it addresses it. I think it just sort of throws it all out there. And part of the sleight of hand is it does this sleight of hand to trick you into thinking it's done something with it just by kind of name checking it, if that makes any sense. That was my experience of it. But I will say, last time I was on here, it was talking about Emilia Perez, another grand swing kind of mega folly. And I was like, I loved this movie, but don't know if anyone should see it. And this one I feel the other way about. I really didn't like this movie, and I kind of think everyone should see it.
Well, one thing I did want to note, as long as we're talking about sleight of hand and the mystery of making this for $10 million, is that even an interview done for Slate, but with Brady Corbet about how he got the movie made, sort of glossed over the fact that a huge part of why it was able to be so cheap is it was filmed in Hungary, where, labor conditions are very different and labor is much cheaper. He's certainly not the first filmmaker to have taken advantage of that, of international labor law to get a movie made more cheaply. But, there's, as long, Isaac, as you were comparing the Guy Pearce character to Brady Corbet himself, there certainly is some ethical sleight of hand going on in the making of this movie as well.
You mean making it in a country with an authoritarian strongman who has crushed the labor movement?
Right. I mean, there's certainly some taking advantage of the conditions of international capital in order to make a very large movie critiquing it. All right. Well, we've gone way over, but there's so much more to say about The Brutalist that we decided to do a Slate Plus segment talking about the ending and talking about all the things we can't kind of get into on main. So look for that if you're a Slate Plus subscriber.
Promise you won't betray him. I promise.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 40% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
It's Christmas Eve at Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest travel days of the year, and the low-level TSA agent Ethan Kopech, played by Taron Egerton, has just learned that his girlfriend Nora, a higher-ranking airport security official, played by Sophia Carson, is pregnant. They're thrilled with the news, but Ethan is anxious about his professional future, which we gather has been stalled at an unsatisfying place for some time. As Ethan and Nora are settling into what promises to be a stressful workday, it gets a lot more stressful when a mysterious traveler, played by Jason Bateman, communicates remotely to Ethan via a high-tech scheme that we'll get into more in our discussion, that if the TSA scanner doesn't let through his carry-on suitcase containing some unidentified but deadly object, a sniper with a weapon trained on Nora at that very moment will let her have it. The hapless Ethan finds himself at the center of a complicated and frankly confusing plot involving Russian agents, deadly neurotoxins, and an LAPD cop, played by Danielle Deadweiler, who's trying in vain to convince her colleagues that there is, in fact, something going on at the airport worth skipping Christmas Eve dinner to investigate. Carry On was directed by the genre craftsman Jaume Collet-Serra, who is not new to air travel-based suspense. He also directed Non-Stop, starring Liam Neeson, as well as the movie The Shallows, aka Blake Lively versus a shark in the open ocean. We're going to hear a scene from early in Carry On. You're going to hear the voice of Jason Bateman as the unnamed bad guy speaking into an earpiece to Egerton's terrified TSA agent.
This is how it goes, Ethan. Soon, an associate of mine is going to step into your line with a boarding pass for Northwind Flight 1850 nonstop to JFK. You are going to make sure that his bag clears the machine.
This is a joke, right?
Is anything I just said funny?
No.
If it's any consolation, you were not my first choice. You're not where you're supposed to be today, but that is okay. To be honest, it makes my day a little easier.
Okay. I'll play along. What's in the bag?
Diamonds. Out of Papua New Guinea.
Bullshit.
Okay.
You answer too quickly.
Yeah, maybe because knowing won't change anything, and I hope I don't have to execute someone close to you to prove it.
Okay, Julia, I'm going to start with you because you were the one who really wanted us to talk about Carry On. Carry On, we should say, is, I think for a while, it was #1 most viewed movie on Netflix. It's been quite successful. I think a lot of people during the holiday season tuned in to watch this movie, and that was part of why we wanted to know what everyone was talking about. So what'd you think?
Yeah, I thought we should have some counter programming to our typical habit of starting the new year by talking about the very, very, very best movies made in a given year and the movies that are likely to be Oscar contenders. I don't believe Carry On is likely to be an Oscar contender, but it is a premium example of a kind of programming that Netflix has gotten excellent at, which is the snackable family watch dropped over the holidays. They do this now annually. It's clearly part of a programming strategy. And Carry On is one of the most successful such projects it's ever released. It was not only #1 on Netflix for a couple weeks, it got 42 million views in its first 2 days, which made it Netflix's biggest ever film debut for an English language film. And then it got even more viewership in the week that followed. So if this were a box office movie, it would be a wild, wild hit if the numbers were to port over exactly. Although the question of whether people would show up at a box office to watch this as opposed to just clicking it up on their couch, we can get into. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. It's kind of a well-made, old-fashioned, dumb concept thriller. And I found many parts of it delightful, including the central performances of Taron Egerton and Jason Bateman. It is a classic thing in movies to be like, can you make just two people talking on the phone interesting. There is a series of movies that are just conversations on phones, basically, and that's essentially what this movie is. And to me, it passed that bar. Danielle Dudweiler is great as well. I have significant problems with Nora, Nora, the girlfriend played by Sophia Carson, who is so, I can't tell if she's a terrible actor or if hair and makeup did her terribly dirty by making her seem like a completely unreal person, or whether the script, the director spoke about how the script is intended to be the trolley problem made real. Like, do you sacrifice the one person you love for all these people at the airport? Taron Egerton never seems to give the trolley problem a moment's thought. He's always got to save the girlfriend no matter what, which is perhaps a weakness in the film. But anyway, I certainly was able to understand why jillions and jillions of Netflix viewers clicked this up over the holiday. And I am very curious what you guys thought.
Ugh. All right. Well, I'm going to throw it to Isaac, but I completely disagree for the record. I will get to why later on. I mean, I guess I see why people get it and that it's second screen, undemanding viewing, but it just struck me as such depressing Netflix slop. I mean, whatever qualities it may have aside, the entire thing seemed to have been thrown together so hastily and it looked so ugly the way it was lit. But all right, I'm going to try to be the host instead of the chief complainer and throw it to you, Isaac. What about Carry On? Did it do it for you?
I watched it on a plane. Okay.
Ah.
And because I know the issue of the plane movie is deeply important to Culture Gabfest and its listeners. I was like, I'm going to download this and watch it on a plane. And it was pretty enjoyable on a plane. I think if I had watched it in my living room, I would have been like, what am I doing with my one wild and precious life? But it was enjoyable on a plane. The movie it reminds me of, although the movie I'm going to mention now is a far better film. The movie it reminds me of is Michael Bay's Ambulance, in that the actual drama of the movie is that its premise is not enough material for a feature-length film, and you're constantly wondering what twists they're going to have to come up with to keep it going the entire time. I think Ambulance does a better job of doing that. It's also so like, it's camp. I mean, Ambulance is kind of camp, and that's why I also enjoyed it. This is my one big thought about Carry On. I think the big problem, it's not exactly his fault, is Taron Egerton. And the reason why is not anything he's doing, but throughout the whole point of the movie is that he is a schlub who's coasting through life, who Jason Bateman's character underestimates, who then discovers his hidden potential and self-actualizes through saving the day, right? He is... the movie it's in direct conversation with is Die Harder, right? And the problem is Taron Egerton looks like a tuxedo model. He does not look like anyone who's coasting through life. You would never underestimate that guy in a million years. But then I started thinking about it and I was like, okay, well, who is a like 30 to 35-year-old actor who could be like, who's sort of like Bruce Willis in the early Die Hard movies, or Walter Matthau in Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, or, someone who you might not think could save the day. And I realized I couldn't think of a single one. You mentioned earlier, Julia, about how Hollywood has found interesting faces, right? Like, I think part of the reason why I think Adrian Brody got grandfathered in because his career started 20 some odd years ago. I think Hollywood has lost interest in people who look like normal people. But I actually think this movie would be so much more effective if its lead actor looked like a normal person.
Well, it's so funny because I didn't have that problem with Egerton, who I think, maybe I'm just giving holdover Rocketman props to him. Like, I really thought, I didn't love that movie, but I thought that performance was pretty amazing. And I don't know, his performance didn't bother me, although I can see the point you're making. And it echoes so much the point I felt about Nora, the girlfriend. Like, she is clearly like an up and coming middle management, like mobile middle class job at the airport. I think she works for one of the airlines, actually, not TSA. And she doesn't look human. She looks, her whole hair and makeup. There's a whole first scene where they're talking about his lack of ambition, where what's happening in her lips is so makeup ad that you're like, nobody's lips look like that on the morning bus to TSA. And if you want to show character through hair and makeup, like make her look like a real person who's trying to look like an Instagram airbrush girly. Like there are people all over Los Angeles. There's people I've seen working at TSA who look like that. Those are real specific people who are doing that makeup. But there's a way to do that where it looks like a person trying to look like that, as opposed to just looking like that. And you're like, who is this? This girlfriend is such a figment. Anyway, I find it much more distracting with her. I find it impossible to tell whether she was a terrible actress or just had to fight through terrible hair and makeup. And whatever, the plot around her didn't give her much to do either. So I'll call it a do-over for her. But I don't know. I can see that, I do think some of the, if Chris Pine is like a leading man himbo, but with the soul of a character actor underneath that face and body, I do feel like maybe Hollywood has gotten less imaginative about the kind of faces it elevates. But then the best of those faces actually want to do more interesting things. And I feel like I had more, I was able to buy it with Taron Egerton, but I understand where you're coming from.
I just say, give me a guy with like normal abs and a face like a shoe. And I would have liked that movie a lot more.
Yeah, I could see like a young John C. Reilly in that role, right? Or like a younger Seth Rogen, or somebody who is a little bit schlubby, and you could actually buy them as a no scrubs, unambitious kind of TSA agent. But I don't think it is just a casting problem. It's mainly a script problem. I mean, I utterly am with you, Julia, on the ridiculously AI generated looks of the girlfriend. But I was watching this with my husband, and he kept on saying, I feel like this whole movie was AI generated. It's sort of like Die Harder, also set in an airport. It's not an homage to Die Harder. It's just sort of trying to borrow those vibes, but in this really just overlit, flat, like it just felt so much like it was checking off boxes that even interesting choices like casting Jason Bateman as a ruthless villain, just they became all part of the flatness. I think, though, the main problem to me, and here I won't get into spoilers because this is the kind of movie that lives or dies on its plot twists. But at the beginning, it's all set up forever. It's 20 minutes of setup about how incredibly hard it is to get through TSA, and how amazingly sort of clever Taron Egerton's character is going to have to be to get around these security rules at the airport. By the end of the movie, people are just running through vast, empty, unguarded spaces, shooting at each other throughout the airport on a day, by the way, where it's now the cops and the FBI have been alerted that there's these terrorist problems at the airport. In fact, the airport would have 1,000 more cops and guards than it usually does and be even more hard to get through. Instead, Taron Egerton is just like leaping atop various vehicles and racing through the airport, and sort of all verisimilitude has been thrown aside for a suspenseful ending. And I guess that's the kind of thing that if you're just rolling with it, it's kind of fun and campy or something. But I just kept thinking your own premises have been completely destroyed by, each new plot development. And so I couldn't get with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I had fun with all that stuff because it just gets so ludicrous as it goes along. And again, I was on a plane, right?
20% upgrade of quality.
20% upgrade of quality because I was on a plane. And I really think if you're going to see this movie, that is the way to go. So download it onto your tablet and watch it on a plane.
Unless you're anxious about flying and you're afraid that someone is in the hold of that plane with some sort of deadly nerve agent.
I will say one other thing that I appreciated about it is that guy whose name I am not going to bother trying to pronounce because I know that I would butcher it, who also directed Nonstop. Like, he knows what he's doing. Do you know what I mean? Like the movie, I agree that it's overlit, the makeup issues or whatever. It is, however, very well staged in a lot of places. Like, if you actually just sit there and watch it, like, he knows how to arrange bodies in space. The chase through the luggage treadmills or whatever those are. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The carousels, right?
The luggage carousels, which, okay, is it as good as the same chase in Toy Story 2? No. But is it still fun? Yes. Like, there's a lot of, like, he's not, I think you called him a craftsman earlier, Dana, and I think that's exactly right. There are moments where you can, like, feel him giving a shit that make the movie a little more interesting. And Jason Bateman is good. But also, yeah, watch it on a plane or don't watch it at all would be my advice.
I do want to say it's a really fun performance from Jason Bateman. I guess there've been a couple other movies where he's been the bad guy, but yeah, but he the particular kind of bad guy he is here, which is like smarmy and casual but ruthless underneath, is slightly novel and fun, and I think helps make the movie work to the degree that it works. And I don't know, the high concept 90s movie it reminded me of, again, that it's not nearly as good as, but this is a much better movie than Ambulance, I'm going to stipulate, having not seen Ambulance. But it reminded me of Speed in just the like sheer stupid ridiculousness of the premise. Like, it's high concept and you just have to kind of accept how idiotic the whole thing is and then go for the ride. And I'm in no way am suggesting that this movie should otherwise be mentioned in the same sentence as Speed. Like, it's not nearly as good. It's not nearly as effective. The relationships aren't as good. And the unreality of the girlfriend is part of why, I think. But that sense of, you know, to the degree that there, the patter is between Keanu and Sandra Bullock, and here the patter is between Taron Egerton's character and Jason Bateman's, like that central relationship kind of works and carries you through along with sort of the kind of staging inventiveness of it. So anyway, I'm not too good for Carry On. I think if it sounds like the sort of thing you might enjoy on a plane or on a couch, enjoy away, I say.
Well, if nothing else, Julia, it was brilliant to pair this with The Brutalist, because there couldn't be two movies that sort of set their sights in different directions, you know, both of which I think kind of accomplish those to some degree with a fair amount of craft, but, you know, they want their audiences to feel very different ways.
Yeah, you know, you have one that is like this, you know, total work that you have to observe. You have another one that you don't actually even have to watch while it's on, you know.
Laundry folding special.
Yeah. One looks like it costs $200 million and costs $10 million. The other looks like it costs $10 million but costs $50 million. You know, it's like they couldn't be a higher contrast.
All right, well, let's carry on. It's streaming on Netflix. You can't avoid it. It's going to be the most promoted thing in your Netflix queue. So take a look if you're interested. All right, well, it's the moment in our show where we talk about this week's business. Julia, what is it this week?
Yes, Dana, we have two pieces of business today. The first is to remind our listeners that if they are not yet, they should become Slate Plus members. With your Slate Plus membership, you get ad-free versions of our podcast, access to special bonus episodes, including this week's bonus episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about The Brutalist and dig into its secret meanings and dark mysteries. Don't worry, we'll figure it all out. It will be entirely explained and revealed and illuminated by the time the segment ends. So you get ad-free episodes, bonus episodes for our show, for other Slate shows, and of course, you get unlimited access to the Slate site and all of its journalism, and your support helps make all that work and our work possible. To sign up for Slate Plus and get those benefits, you can go to slate.com/culture plus. Second, we have a correction, and it is a correction to something I said. And it's ultimately the correction is very good news, but I feel very silly for having made this mistake. In our call-in show, I spoke about a dear and beloved professor of mine at Brown, Nancy Rosenblum, who was a political science professor I learned a ton from and took 2 classes from. On the show, I said erroneously that she had passed away. She is alive and well and working. She went from Brown to Harvard and was a professor there for many years. She had a book that came out in 2024, co-written with Russell Muirhead, called Ungoverning: The Attack on the Administrative State and the Politics of Chaos, How a Concentrated Attack on Political Institutions Threatens to Disable the Essential Workings of Government. It sounds incredibly prescient. I'm delighted to learn that I was mistaken in that understanding. I have no idea how I got that idea into my head. But I apologize to her and to anyone who was confused by what I said. She is still doing wonderful work, and I am going to go buy this book and check it out because it certainly seems pertinent. So my apologies to Professor Rosenblum and to all of you.
As Mark Twain said, rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. All right. Well, for our third segment, we're going to talk about the 2024 Movie Club. It's now the very beginning of 2025. And that moment, basically the week or so before Christmas and around Christmas time, is the busiest time of the year for movie critics. It's when they're making their 10 best lists. It's when, if you're in an awards group or guild or several, you're voting on those awards. In my case, I'm also researching and getting together Movie Club. It's sort of the time of taking stock for the year. And Movie Club, if you don't know it, is a feature that's existed on Slate, I believe, since Slate's existence in 1996. I'm not sure if it started a couple years later, but it certainly was already a longstanding feature of the magazine when I joined up in the early 2000s. And Movie Club is just simply an email exchange, kind of a roundtable among a group of critics from different publications. This year it was 5 critics. Some years it's 4. Sometimes we go 3 rounds, 4 rounds. There are some past clubs that got up into the 25 entries or something, but this year we capped it at 16. But there's always more to say because it's a really nice self-generating conversation where you don't have to worry about things like spoilers or giving a complete recap of everything that happens in the movie. It's not a review. You really get a chance to kind of dig into your likes and dislikes and obsessions and maybe any themes or trends that emerged during the year. Julia, I'm going to start with you because you have such a long history with Movie Club. I mean, you once were the editor of Slate and you've read many a Movie Club over the years. What do you think of this year's?
Oh, I always love Movie Club, and I loved this one just as much. And I especially enjoy learning more about the voices of the critics who I enjoy reading all year, who I don't get to talk with every week as I do with you. I loved having Alison Wilmore in the group. She's a critic who I feel like 3 or 4 times last year, I had the feeling of having a bunch of inchoate ideas about a movie. And then I read her review and I was like, aha, that's what I was thinking. And so,
yeah, she'll do that. She really can.
Yeah, her review of Twister was so fantastic. I remember Twisters. Sorry.
Yes, it was excellent. Even though I liked the movie and she didn't, she really nailed some important things about it.
She explained its mediocrity very precisely. But I think the thing I took away most from it, one of the things I love about it is the same thing I enjoy about our show, which is I think you learn something different from critics in conversation than you do from critics pronouncing, because you see them debating and discovering, and it opens you up to multiple ideas, which I think is the best way to find out what you yourself think. But I loved how much energy there was this year around how many interesting and exciting films there were. I mean, so many years, as you guys note, the Movie Club is kind of a conversation, a lament, the dominance of Marvel, the end of film, the our movies, jazz, etc. And despite the fact that this was a year kind of affected in many ways in terms of the output by the recent strike in Hollywood, there was a lot to chew on and a lot of different types of things to chew on. And I definitely came away with a sense of a bunch of movies that we haven't seen and discussed yet that I'd like to see and discuss, some of which are likely to be Oscar contenders and some of which less so. So, it was a jolly discussion this year.
Isaac, was there anything that stuck out for you in terms of something that we talked about that you either hadn't thought about or that made you think about this year's movies in a different way?
Well, I always love Bilga's, the movies that Bilga will go to bat for.
Yes, Vilga-Berry of
the
Vulture.
Fall Guy. Yeah, I mean, I love
call
Bilga.
him the Scarecrow of Movie Club. Like, I'm the Dorothy and he's the Scarecrow because he always says yes. He always rides along. He's like he's your co-pilot.
I love Bilga as a person and as a critic, and it's always fun to me to see what he'll come up with as the best movies of the year, because it will always be some mix between like, here's an obscure Romanian film that played for one day at the Quad, and in this case, The Fall Guy starring Ryan Gosling. Do you know what I mean? I love Movie Club. I started reading Slate when it launched in 96 or 97 when I was when I was in college, and I've read Movie Club ever since. Slate used to do a lot of features that were people kind of emailing each other in conversation. They used to have a week-long thing called Dialogues that were like 2 prominent people corresponding, and there would be a new thing every day. And I understand why most of that stuff has gone away. I actually think Movie Club is maybe the last vestige of that old stuff in Slate, but I loved that shit. I really did. And as a young person trying to be culturally literate in New York, one of the wonderful things that Movie Club did was introduce me to critics that I might not have otherwise known. That's not, now I'm a middle-aged fogey and I know all the critics or whatever, but the first time I read Manohla Dargis was in Movie Club. for example. So I've always loved it, and it's always been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed as well how like generous you all were with each other, because you certainly don't agree on things, you know what I mean? There are different movies you liked and loved and hated and whatever, but it's all done with a sense of generosity towards each other as writers and as people, and sort of towards the medium. My feeling is that this has been a very weird movie year because of the strike and because of lots of stuff being delayed. While there may be awards frontrunners or whatever, there's no like clearly capital G great 2 movies or whatever, you know what I mean? Or 2 or 3 movies. And a lot of the stuff that people are most excited about is kind of obscure. All We Imagine Is Light, for example, or Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World, which I actually just watched yesterday and think is a kind of amazing movie. And so part of what I thought was interesting was that, especially, was the conversation you all had about like, well, what movie that someone didn't see this year, if you didn't know that much about them, would you actually recommend to them to go see? Right? Because it struck me that part of what's going on is, the kind of audience, much like everything else in our culture, is so fragmented now that figuring out like what is the thing that if I didn't know you that well, I could be like, hey, you probably like this. It gets more and more challenging every year.
Yeah, Bilge's answer to that, I remember, was Green Border, the Agnieszka Holland film that I haven't seen yet. That's about migrants in the modern day, about people crossing the border in Europe. And that looks fantastic. I'm not sure if I answered that question directly, but I think honestly, although it's a big enough movie that they're likely to have advice to see it anyway. But I think the movie for me that I would tell the largest kind of cross section of people to go and see is Anora. Is just such a crowd pleaser. I mean, I've now had the experience of recommending it to my mother, who's 84, and my daughter, who's 18, and they both saw it and they both loved it. It has a very wide appeal, but not exactly an obscure find. And yeah, the differing tastes is really one of my favorite things about the club. It's because it's a place to really stretch your range as a critic and start thinking about taste in a different way. For example, Megalopolis, right? The Francis Ford Coppola self-financed kind of legendary flop that went absolutely nowhere at the box office, and that was generally agreed upon as just sort of this strange late career curiosity from this once great auteur, right? Made the list, the 10 best list of 2 of the people in the club, I believe. And as a result, I wound up rewatching Megalopolis, not liking it more than the previous time, but seeing different things in it. And despite the fact that that movie, was an absolute non-starter of conversations during the movie year and will continue to be during award season, there were 3 of us who had entries not completely on Megalopolis, but in some way touching on things in that movie, which in a way end up being about way more than that movie, of course, right? Because they're about auteurship and about the market and, about all kinds of things that movie folds into its very existence. So I love that part of the club, that you have to rethink things you really couldn't stand. I mean, The Substance, one of my least favorite viewing experiences of the year that I know you too, Isaac, found really unbearable, was really high on Alison Wilmore's list.
I loved The Substance.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, we never talked about it. Well, now we have to do a sidebar on The Substance. For some reason, maybe just because of some of your snarky posts about it online, I assumed. So you loved it?
No. I think The Substance is 30 minutes too long, but I still loved it. I had a blast at The Substance. No. I had a blast at The Substance. That's a fun one to see in a full theater to get for people's reactions when gross stuff starts happening.
Yeah, I wonder if I had seen that in a commercial screening rather than a critic screening, if I would have enjoyed it more.
As someone who saw it in a commercial screening, I do not think you would have enjoyed it more.
I also thought, although it didn't prompt like much of a longer conversation the way Megalopolis did, I really loved Ken Collins's post about Here, the Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah, the Robert Zemeckis adaptation of that graphic novel.
And well, in part because the graphic novel, I mean, I haven't seen the movie. The graphic novel is extraordinary. The original mini comic it's based on is like 8 perfect pages of brilliance. And then in this kind of expanded version of the graphic novel, it's incredible. But I also loved how Cam was sort of bringing up these larger points about like what a home is. That the home of the family stone, which is the movie he compares it to, kind of doesn't exist anymore. Just what a home means in this moment of housing crisis is a totally different thing now, I thought was really smart and something I had not thought about with that material before.
Yeah, all of those critics that I invited to Movie Club have moments where I feel like I wish I could do what that person does. And I think Cam Collins may be one of the ones who the most often causes that simultaneous sense of like, oh, that's such a beautiful moving point that he made, and like I'm burning with envy because I covet this person's critical ability and writing skill. But yeah, that's a wonderful post, which is really as much about real estate and about the state of the American economy right now as it is about the movies he's discussing.
Well, also I find I'm like allergic to Zemeckis, like the mostly the stop motion stuff, which this movie is, I don't know, but there's something about the Zemeckis aesthetic, like the sets of things that he looks at and is like, this is what I want everyone to see. I find so skin crawling in the stop motion world, and it's sort of extended to the rest of his oeuvre that trailer, nothing has repelled me like that trailer in like 5 years. And what I loved about that post is it made me want to see that movie, which like you could not have, the notion that anything would have left me wanting to see that movie was so shocking to me. So I don't know that I will go so far as to see it, but at least it gave me an attitudinal turnabout. I'm curious for each of you guys, and then I can add mine. Like, what's the film you haven't seen that this discussion, either participating in it, Dana, or just reading it, Isaac, left you feeling like you have to run out and go see?
Oh, I can answer that immediately. In fact, I'm almost ashamed not to have seen this movie because I suspect that it would have made my 10 best list if I had seen it, just because of my own predilections. It's Hundreds of Beavers, which is this self-financed, very small budget indie movie that's a comedy, a physical comedy that apparently does a lot of borrowing from silent comedy and, you know, like Keaton Chaplin kinds of gags, and in some way involves beavers that I'm not clear on. It sounds extremely silly, but also beautifully crafted. And a couple of the different critics had it on their list. It was only mentioned as sort of a title in passing in our conversation. Nobody really dug into it, but I'm sort of glad about that because I don't want to know too much about Hundreds of Beavers. I just want to jump in and watch it. And I will certainly report back on the Culture Fest after I've seen it.
Can I give you one assignment, Dana, before we hear from Isaac, which is, I was astonished that you never saw The Apprentice. I understand how repulsive the topic is, but I really liked that movie and thought there was a lot of value in it. And I really think you should see it. Like, I'm bummed that your year-end list didn't include you having seen it. Not that it would have made your list, but like, I know you're repulsed by its subject, repelled by its subject, but it's, I don't know. I think it's interesting, and I think you should see it.
All right, that's a good directive, and I know I should see it, and I probably will see it. I guess I just sort of assumed that at some point in talking about political biopics, I would have to see it. And there was a side of me, as I say in the club, that was just relieved that I happened to be on vacation the week it came out, and you all chose to talk about it, because I thought this constantly during the first Trump administration. Like, I was just thinking, I really do not want to see some sort of deadly HBO, march through these events. But I know that there can be other forms of political biopics that are not that.
It's just interesting. It's really, I don't know. I think it's worth your attention. And I know that I just told you that Carry On was worth your attention. So possibly my view is not trustworthy, but I think it's more up your alley than Carry On.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of holes in my viewing, so I will count that among them. Isaac, what about you?
Well, so I am really behind on my movie viewing because I was making like a big push on the book throughout December when all the movies were coming out. And I was just holed up in my basement typing away, trying to get the first half of the book done into my editor. And so I'm behind on a lot of stuff. So there's lots of movies that people talked about that I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't seen Nickel Boys yet, or, whatever it is. But I will say that the thing that Bilga wrote about Green Border, I have not seen that movie yet. I like Agnieszka Holland's films. I sort of had forgotten that it was out, and that definitely made me want to go see it. I think his larger point that he made a couple times, that like no one even knows when movies are out or where they're playing anymore or how to go see them or which streamer they're on or which movie theater or whatever, is a really good one that like I often find myself losing track of these things, and I'm a fucking culture writer, for God's sake. You know what I mean? And so that was one that I just sort of forgotten was coming out last year, and I'm definitely interested in seeing.
All right. Well, I think the answer for me is Union.
Oh, it's so good.
The doc about
oh my God,
people trying to unionize at an Amazon plant, I think on Staten Island. And maybe we'll come back around to that as the documentary race heats up.
I mean, one thing I can guarantee is if listeners read through Movie Club, they're going to come out with a healthy list of titles. Even if you're somebody who keeps up with movies really closely, as I try to do as much as I can, you come out with plenty of titles that you either, like The Apprentice, missed for one reason or another in the course of the year, or just simply never would have heard about otherwise, like Hundreds of Beavers for me. Well, it's up now on Slate. It's the Slate Movie Club. It's 16 entries this year. And if you want to follow our conversation about the movies of 2024, please check it out. All right, we've reached that moment in the Slate Culture Gabfest where we endorse our favorite cultural experience of the past week or so. Isaac, what have you got this week?
I've got a story in ProPublica that I read a couple days ago. I almost want to say very little about it because it's so masterfully written and just gradually unfurls its information in a really beautiful and compelling way. But it's about this doctor in rural Montana.
I've been meaning to read this.
Yeah.
I keep hearing that this story is incredible.
It's incredible. It's about a doctor in rural Montana, an oncologist who was essentially preying on his patients. The exact details of how he did that and what it was and stuff, I will let you discover when you read the article. It's called Eat What You Kill. It came out in early December in ProPublica. It's a masterpiece of research and of storytelling. The lengths this reporter goes to figure out, who various people are and how they find various sources and some of his patients, and they get access to sealed discovery materials from a lawsuit. And there's one point where the reporter finds someone through their obituary in this really odd way, and it's a great piece of detective work on top of being just a really compellingly written story. It's one of those ones where every time you're kind of like, well, this couldn't possibly get any worse. There will be like a section break, and then the reporter will go, then it got worse. It's a really incredibly told story. And it also sheds a light on all the various safeguards that were in place to try to keep the stuff from happening that's in this article really failed. And there's multiple ones within the hospital system, within insurance, within local government, within federal government, et cetera. And they all failed basically because the money was flowing. And so it connects these like very personal stories and this very compelling kind of true crime narrative about this doctor and his patients to these kind of larger issues affecting for-profit medicine in this really deft way. It's just like one of the best reported things I've read in a very long time, and I could not recommend it enough. It is rough. There's some really dark shit in there, buyer beware, but it's really worth reading. And again, it's called Eat What You Kill, and you can find it at ProPublica.
Wow, that sounds incredible and demanding, and I've already scribbled it down. Julia, what have you got this week?
I had so much fun over the holiday rewatching two classic films of my youth with my children. And I have two things to recommend. One is one of the films, and one is a part of one of the other films. So the first film is My Cousin Vinny. Have you guys rewatched My Cousin Vinny anytime recently?
Yeah, I saw it about 2 years ago or so, also with my kid, and it holds up amazingly.
It holds up incredibly well. Like when you think about Hollywood craftsmanship and what people used to easily be able to do with big blockbuster films, it is well written. The characters are precise. The beats are lovely. It mostly ages well. There's a character whose stutter is made fun of, is the one part that's really tonally off and doesn't work. But Marissa Tomei, God bless her, she should just go polish that Oscar every day. That is, in fact, a great performance, an incredibly fun, precise performance that could have just been a bundle of stereotypes, but in fact is so specifically rendered. And same goes for Pesci and for the stakes for his lawyer. He's nervous, and he's got this high stakes thing he's got to do, and he's not sure he can do it, and then he figures out how to do it, and it's so funny. So many great character performances. Truly put it on tonight. It is a wonderful, wonderful film. And we had sort of had an idea this might be a fun age appropriate thing to rewatch with our kids, but it far exceeded my memory and expectations for how fun a watch it was. Light on its feet. Then heady with confidence, we decided that we should watch Three Men and a Baby, because so often my husband and my two 11-year-old sons end up taking care of our 3-year-old baby, not so baby anymore, girl. And so I think just for sheer joke of the title, my husband had thought it would be kind of funny for the 3 men of the baby to watch Three Men and a Baby. It was so perplexing to my children because the whole conceit is that men are such idiots with babies. And, you know, my husband is an incredible knack for children. My sons are lovely with our daughter. Like the notion of just how idiotic, just the sexism of it and how idiotic and befuddled these dudes are was bewildering. But the thing I do want to endorse about Three Men and a Baby is the production design of the fucking insane apartment that they live in. Like, it is worth rewatching merely for that apartment because the conceit is the Tom Selleck character is an architect. The Ted Danson character is an actor. And the Steve Guttenberg character writes like a daily comic strip. And I think we're meant to believe that Selleck and Guttenberg are successful and Danson's kind of a struggling actor. But they live in like a ludicrous penthouse. Each room is like a different 80s style. There's Memphis Milano. There's like black silk sheets. There's this kitchen that's also a greenhouse with a ton of like Alessi accoutrement in it. The opening sequence is the Gutenberg cartoonist character doing this kind of pop art mural in their lobby as we see the parade of women that they womanizingly womanize going in and out. I could read a dissertation about this production design. Like it lends itself to all the questions you would have around like, why would they have that apartment? Like, if they're so rich that they can afford a penthouse, why are 3 men in their 30s living together as roommates? And then,
like, why are 3 straight dudes with an infinite amount of money creating some bizarre fantasy space together?
There's like a game room that's like neon 80s deco. There's like a screening room. And then it's one of those apartments that's like dream logic where it seems like they can just add rooms as they need more. And then that's brought to a head in the conclusion where to spoil 3 Men and a Baby, which I'm going to do now. So block your ears if you don't want to know what happens in this 1987 film. But at the very end, the mother of the baby returns, and then she's going to take the baby away, and then they're all sad, and then she realizes she just needs help, and she's like, well, maybe she can move in with us. And then Selleck is like, I'll make you a room, which is like not how rooms work or architecture. But he's like, I'll just add a room to the house.
It's
anyway,
weird because it's total Minecraft logic.
Yes.
It's like, let me just go out and I'll punch this tree a few times and I'll get wood out of it, and then I can build you a room with it, and we'll raise some chickens in there.
Would you like that to be Egyptian themed with an infinity pool?
I mean, the movie gathers some, honestly, like, yes, that's probably the room that Nancy Travis ends up living in with like a, pool fence around it so the baby doesn't fall in the infinity pool. That like only a woman would have thought to build. But I don't know. The movie.
I only remember the scene where none of them understand how to change a diaper.
That scene goes on for like 400 minutes.
And the reason why I thought of it is, when we had a kid, I was like, this is not hard. And I just kept thinking about that scene because I watched that scene when I was a kid.
It was cute seeing my little boys experience sexism. Like they don't get that much of it. And they were just like so confused and hurt. And honestly, the movie picks up steam because pretty quickly they figure out how to take care of and fall in love with the baby. And then once they're not, it's like the first half an hour is, oh, what a womanizing bachelor life they have. Wouldn't it be a shame if something happened to it? And then the next 30 minutes is like, babies, ah! And then the final part where they have fallen in love with the baby and figured things out is more tolerable. We watched half one night and I thought maybe the boys would be like, we don't need to finish that. And then we did, which I was glad because in finishing it, we discovered like 16 more rooms in the apartment. So anyway, My Cousin Vinny and the production design of 3 Men and a Baby are my endorsements this week.
Wow. This ties in with The Brutalist because it's a film about architecture.
Yes.
It sounds like.
What do you think that apartment goes for on Trulia?
Yeah, let's Zillow the apartment and figure out in what universe it could exist.
Upper West Side penthouse with infinite rooms. I don't know. It's a lot.
You know, it's a classic 16, Julia.
All right. Well, Julia's endorsement has heartened me to go ahead and do the one that I was thinking of, which is also a movie I watched with my kid over break. In fact, she had an assignment to watch 16 movies over Christmas break.
Damn.
Which is a really demanding but fun assignment. And 4 of them had to be documentaries. It's a really, really great assignment for acting students, right? Especially my daughter, who, for all of her love of theater and acting, has never been that much of a movie person. I've always had a hard time getting her to watch movies with me, and she comes around to them slowly. So that was really fun for me, and we helped craft a list that, you know, everybody in the family got to put in some titles. And on Christmas Day, and we put it on Christmas Day because this was one of her top choices, we watched Adaptation, the Spike Jonze movie from 2002, written by Charlie Kaufman. And she was blown away. I feel like she may become a movie nerd finally because of Adaptation. She had already seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which she likes a lot too. But Adaptation, with its something about its, you know, tricky nested story and its weird Charlie Kaufman mind expanding script, just really, really did it for her. And we had such a fun night watching it. And something I hadn't realized, it's a movie from 2002, was just how many people who are now huge had small roles in Adaptation. So every minute, this was more for me and her dad than for my daughter, because we knew these actors from our generation. But every other minute we were saying, wait a second, there's baby Maggie Gyllenhaal, you know, there's baby Tilda Swinton, there's Brian Cox. Like, every single role is packed with people who, you know, went on to have these huge careers. And so that was a really fun aspect of it. But also, Adaptation is just a really good, smart movie, which I think I maybe didn't understand how good it was back when I saw it in 2002. It's so clever the way it takes this double performance from Nicolas Cage, right, as Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, and as his fictional twin brother, who are sort of competing screenplay writers with different styles, right? One of them is very Charlie Kaufman-esque, trying to explore all of these, you know, twisted, intricate, labyrinthine ideas. The other one is just trying to write a big, successful kind of 3-act screenplay, right? According to a screenplay formula invented by Brian Cox's screenplay guru. And then the two, in a way that I don't want to spoil if you haven't seen the movie, but the two styles of filmmaking start to sort of braid into the movie that we ourselves are watching, so that it's at once this smart, tricky movie and this big, dumb chase movie. And of course, also a great romance between Chris Cooper and Meryl Streep as Susan Orlean. She's playing the real life writer Susan Orlean, and he's playing the real life orchid thief that she is researching a book about. Anyway, you know all this if you've seen the movie, and it's hard to explain if you haven't seen the movie, but Adaptation 100% held up, and it got my not very movie friendly teen to be really, really excited about film. So
about the other 15 movies she had to see.
And in fact, we saw lots of great movies, some of which I feel like are even more key to her film education than Adaptation is. But yeah, that was the one that really got her brain cells buzzing. I think that does it for this week's Culture Fest. It went so fast. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today, including the movie club. Please read it on our show page, slate.com/culturefest. You can also drop us an email at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer this week is Vic Whitley-Berry. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. And the composer of our theme music is Nicholas Bertel. For Isaac Butler and Julia Turner, I'm Dana Stevens saying thank you so much for being a listener, and we'll talk to you again next week.